son. His name is Spencer. He's a KC-10 pilot in the Air Force. And when he was probably this big, red hair, freckles, I don't know what it was, but we were at Rock Creek Church, which used to be MIFC, and we brought all the kids in for something. I don't know what it was. It was maybe a choir or something. And Tim was the director. And so all the kids are lining up, and Tim is standing on the stage there, and it's real quiet. And our little son Spencer goes, "Hi, Timmy." And everybody could hear, "Hi, Timmy." All right, you guys want to talk miracles?
That'd be a miracle.
That would be a miracle. Tim, why don't you come up here and do a miracle? No? Not today? Tomorrow. Come back tomorrow. Tim will do a miracle. Let's talk about what we mean by miracles before we talk about them, okay? Because there's a lot of what we consider unusual events out there. There are 6 types of unusual events that we're going to talk about briefly. Only one of them is a miracle. You have anomalies, magic, psychosomatic, satanic signs, divine providence, and miracles. So I thought we'd spend just a few minutes talking about this before we talk about miracles, because we don't want to confuse what we mean when we say, "I saw a miracle," or "I experienced a miracle," because I think too often we as Christians throw the term miracle around too loosely. All right? So let's talk about each of these just very briefly. We'll talk about anomalies first. Anomaly. An anomaly is a freak of nature. The anomaly we're going to talk about here is a bumblebee. For many years, scientists didn't know how bumblebees flew because they had wings that were too short for their body. Their aspect ratio wasn't right for you aviators out there. So how could this thing fly? The wings are too short. It shouldn't be able to fly. But they did figure out eventually why it flew. I'll tell you in a minute. The power is physical. It's a natural event with a pattern. Bumblebees always flew. We knew it wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a unique event. We just couldn't explain why they flew. And the example, again, is a bumblebee. A bumblebee flew, but we didn't know why it flew. We ultimately figured out why it flew. It had some kind of power pack on it that would compensate for its lack of wingspan there. And so that's how we knew it flew. We couldn't explain it naturally for quite a while. That's why we call it an anomaly. It's a natural event with a pattern that's inexplicable. The second type of unusual event is magic. Now, magic is a sleight of hand. It's a human sleight of hand. The power's human. The traits are it's unnatural and man-controlled. An example would be, say, a rabbit in a hat. Right? I mean, rabbits don't live in hats. And this is kind of an unusual thing, but it's magic. Once you figure out how it's done, then you go, "Oh, I see how it's done." But until you see how it's done, you go, "This is very odd." And that's the reason it's interesting to you, because it doesn't happen all the time. If you've ever seen a good magician, you go, "Man, how did he do that?" Or "How did she do that? That's amazing." I remember years ago, we went out to a Grand Canyon trip where my son and my dad and I went on a rafting trip down the Grand Canyon. And in order to do it, you fly to Las Vegas, then they fly you to the Grand Canyon on a small plane, and then down into the canyon in a helicopter. So while we were in Las Vegas for a couple of days, we went to see the Penn and Teller show. You know who Penn and Teller are? Well, they're both militant atheists, particularly Penn Jillette. But at least he's not militant in the sense that he's angry, but he's real aggressive in his atheism. In any event, they did part of their show where they actually showed you how they did the trick. And once you saw it, you went, "Man, that's pretty simple. I could have never thought of that." But once you saw it, you go, "Aha, I got it." Before you knew how they did it, you were amazed. But after they showed you, you went, "Oh, all right. Well, that's just magic." Human beings can do magic quite frequently, as you know. The third type of unusual event is psychosomatic. That is a mind over matter situation where the power is mental. The traits are it requires faith. It fails for some sicknesses. What do I mean by that? Some sicknesses can be cured psychosomatically. I'll give you an example here in a minute. But other sicknesses aren't psychosomatic, like cancer is not psychosomatic. It's not just in your mind. It's something that is physical and is a problem that just isn't a psychosomatic situation. An example would be a psychosomatic cure. Like my co-author on I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Dr. Norman Geisler, for many years had allergies, and he was taking all sorts of allergy medication. And one day he was going to preach at a church, and he was at the church early to get situated, and the podium was up there, and he got up to the podium, he put his Bible out there and everything, and then he looked down and he saw that there were flowers right in front of the podium, and immediately his eyes began to well up. He started to sneeze, and he turned to one of the elders. He said, "Hey, you're gonna have to move these flowers. I won't be able to preach. I have an allergy." The elder looked at him and said, "They're plastic." And he thought to himself, "Self, you just sneezed at plastic flowers. That allergy has to be in your head." And ultimately, he threw away his medication. He hasn't had a problem since. Now, it doesn't mean all allergies are like this, don't get me wrong. But in his case, it was psychosomatic. It wasn't really physical. It's just mind thought that he just had this allergy. In fact, in the Stealing from God book, we talk about the fact that your mind and your brain are not the same. Yes, obviously, your brain affects your mind, but sometimes your mind affects your brain in this situation. Also in, say, the placebo effect. You guys know what the placebo effect is, right? You think you're getting medication, but you're not, yet you're still getting better. That's a situation where your thoughts, your immaterial mind, are affecting your material being, your material body. So the causality isn't just from your brain to your mind. The causality is often from your mind to your brain. This is another reason we know that atheism's false, because atheism tries to say everything's made of molecules. Well, your mind isn't made of molecules. Otherwise, the placebo effect wouldn't work. In fact, New Scientist magazine, which is an atheistic magazine, listed the placebo effect as one of the top 13 things that doesn't make sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense because materialism's false. If you're trying to say materialism is true, of course the placebo effect doesn't make sense because you're assuming that materialism is true. It's not. There's an immaterial realm, and your immaterial mind can affect your physical body. I mean, doctors tell you this all the time, don't they? You're under too much stress, right? You're under too much stress. Well, what's stress caused by? It's caused from your mind to your body. You're thinking about things that are causing your body to break down. But psychosomatic's not a miracle. Number 4 is satanic signs. And that's an evil power. It's demonic. The traits are, it's evil. It's associated with falsehoods. It's occult and it's limited. For an example, psychic power or divination, or what Satan may do. Satan cannot truly do miracles. He can do supernormal things, but he can't do supernatural things in the sense that he can have the same power as God. Satan can do tricks that make you think it's a miracle, but it really isn't. In fact, what is it, 2 Thessalonians or 1 Thessalonians, that he will do signs that will even deceive the elect. But he can't say resurrect the dead. Why not? Because if he could resurrect the dead, maybe the resurrection was the work of Satan. It's a big deception. In fact, if you look at Moses with the magicians of Pharaoh, how they could do certain things that Moses could do, but when Moses got to life, they said, this is the hand of God. We don't have power over life. In fact, no extra charge for this, but do you realize that the plagues in Exodus are all slams on the Egyptian gods? In other words, Moses knows the Egyptian culture. He turns the Nile blood. Why? Because they worship the Nile. He blacks out the sun. Why? Because they worship the sun. They worship frogs, so he gives them a lot of frogs. These kind of things. These are all, in fact, when Moses and the Egyptians are at a confrontation, you remember Moses throws his staff down, it turns into a snake. And then the Egyptians do the same thing, turns into a snake. But what does Moses' snake do to the Egyptian snake? He gobbles it up. Well, what's the significance of that? What was the symbol of Egypt? What's on the sarcophagus of King Tut? A cobra. So it's basically saying my God can beat up your God. My dad can beat up your dad. Here it is. He actually eats the symbol of Egypt. So the point I'm trying to make here, though, with regard to this is that Satan's powers are limited. Although they're maybe on human powers, they're not like God. He can't create life. Even the so-called Antichrist or the beast that's in Revelation, the beast doesn't go from death to life. The beast is just reanimated. So in any event, a satanic sign is not a miracle. Then, this is the one we confuse the most. Christians confuse with miracles the most. It's called divine providence. Those are prearranged events where the power is divine. The traits, however, are naturally explained in a spiritual context. An example would be the fog at Normandy. The fog at Normandy helped conceal our attack, but fog happens all the time. It's not a miracle to have fog, but God may have been involved by concealing the attack. Now, it would have been a miracle if our men charged the shores there at Normandy and bullets bounced off their chests. That would have been a miracle, but not fog at Normandy. In fact, there's probably even a greater example is the fog in Brooklyn with Washington. You know the story of that? Where Washington is about to be pinned up against the East River by the Brits. They're coming across what is now called Brooklyn up to the East River before there was a Brooklyn Bridge. And Washington was basically going to have his whole army wiped out until inexplicably one day, instead of taking Washington out, the Brits stopped short of pushing him into the East River, and they set up camp and decided they were going to take Washington out the next day. So what Washington decided to do was to get as many rowboats as he could and take his men across the East River at night. And he started to do that, and he kept fires and horses going, so they thought they were still in camp. The problem was, as the sun was about to come up, there were still a significant number of men on the Brooklyn side of the East River, and those men would be massacred by the Brits. He got most of his men over, but there were still a bunch left. And so what are we going to do now? Well, as the sun's coming up, suddenly a dense fog settles on the east side of the East River, on the Brooklyn side. There's no real fog on the Manhattan side. And this continues to allow Washington to evacuate his men. Then mid-morning, the fog breaks. All of Washington's men are gone. They're on the other side of the river. Inexplicably, this fog settles in. It seems to save Washington's army. There probably wouldn't have been an American Revolution if it wasn't for that. And yet fog happens all the time. But why does it settle in just on the Brooklyn side and not the Manhattan side, and why at that time? And why inexplicably did the Brits stop before taking Washington out? This is what we use when we normally say that we experience divine providence a lot, and we call it a miracle, but it's not a miracle, right? It's a miracle I met my wife. No, it's not a miracle unless she walked across the lake on top of it to see you. Right? God may have prearranged events so that you met, but he didn't suspend any natural laws or overpower any natural laws for that to happen. To truly have a miracle, what you need is a divine act where the power is certainly supernatural. It's something that never fails. It's immediate. It lasts, and it brings glory to God. What do I mean by it lasts? Like if it's truly a divine cure, it doesn't just last a day. It'll till the guy dies. You know, if Jesus heals somebody who's blind, he can see till he dies, right? It's not a temporary thing. And it brings glory to God. It does not require faith to have a miracle. Why? Well, I mean, there may be some, but did it require any faith for Lazarus to be resurrected from the dead? No, Lazarus was dead. He couldn't have had faith, right? God can do a miracle with or without your faith. He can do a miracle at any time, and an example, of course, is raising the dead. Raising the dead. So this is a true miracle, and miracles involve overpowering natural laws. What do I mean by overpowering natural laws? I mean, some will say, well, miracles can't occur because it violates natural laws. No, it doesn't. It just simply overpowers natural laws. I'm overpowering a natural law right now. What natural law am I overpowering? Gravity, right? If an agent intervenes in the natural realm, the agent can overpower the natural law. Now, if the agent decides he's not going to intervene anymore, fine. Natural law takes over. But if I can overpower a natural law, can the creator of natural laws overpower them? Of course. This is why it's silly to say miracles can't occur. Of course they can occur. The very creator of the natural laws himself can overpower the natural law. Certainly if we can overpower him, can't God? Yes, of course. So if you want all of them, here's that whole thing in a chart right there. And that chart is in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So this is chapter 8 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So if you want more details on what a miracle is and what a miracle isn't, just get the book I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And you can get all that and go deeper if you want. But let's talk about, are they possible? We said those are the different kinds of unusual events. Let's go back to before there was any mass communication, say 500 years ago. If one king wanted to communicate with another king over a great distance, how could he do it? What would he send? A messenger, and what would be on the message? A seal, right? There would be a seal on the message, and that seal would authenticate that the message came from the king. Now, it seems to me there has to be two characteristics of this seal to make it effective. Number one, it would have to be unique to the king, because if everybody had the seal, obviously you wouldn't know if it came from the king. Secondly, it would have to be difficult to forge, because if you could forge it, obviously you could send false messages from the king. Seems to me this is what miracles do. Miracles are like a seal from the king. They say, this is a message from the king. This is a message from God. If miracles are poured out on an individual, that individual speaks for God. In fact, this is the question, why miracles? What's the purpose of miracles? It turns out that the miracle confirms the message, the sign confirms the sermon. Why should somebody listen to Moses or Elijah or Jesus? Because that person can do miracles. If that person can do miracles, God is speaking through him. That's the point. In fact, how many miracles are there in the Bible, approximately? What do you think? A lot. Another good answer. No. There's about 250, depending upon how you count them. Some of them are bunched up, but let's just say 250. And let's just go from Abraham to Jesus. How many years is that? 2,000 years. So if you got 250 miracles over 2,000 years, how often do you get a miracle? Math majors? How often? How many times does 250 go into 2,000? Come on, this is easy. 8. Who said it? Tracy. Are you a homeschool mom? See, there you go. She got it immediately. The guys are going 10, 12, no, 8. So you get a miracle every 8 years. I mean, we think miracles are occurring in the Bible all the time. No, they're not. They occur on average once every 8 years. But do they occur like that? Yeah, miracle, 8 years later, another miracle, 8 years later. No, where do they occur? How do they occur? They're occurring in bunches. Around who? Around people who have new revelation that needs new confirmation. If you notice, when God is doing miracles through people, he's doing them in these 3 general areas. There are a few exceptions, but generally Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Because these are people that have new revelation, and therefore they need new confirmation. Why should people believe in Moses, Elijah or Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. God is pouring out miracles through them, so this is going to be a sign that whatever this individual says, you ought to listen to. Now, some people believe miracles are impossible. For example, Noah. How can you believe in the Noah miracle? That seems outlandish. I actually believe the Noah's Ark thing actually occurred. In fact, 10 years ago, it was 2006. Can't believe it's been that long now. I actually went on a Noah's Ark expedition with a friend of mine, the real Indiana Jones. His name is Bob Cornuke. And in fact, he and I lead tours all the time overseas. We're going on our 3rd Israel trip in June. But this guy, Bob Cornuke, has been looking for major archaeological discoveries in the past 20 or so years, 25 years, like Noah's Ark he's been looking for. He's been up Mount Ararat 5 times. He's been looking for the anchors of Paul in Malta. I think he's found them. In fact, we were in Valletta a few years ago, and they actually brought up in the 1970s 4 anchors from a first century Corinthian freighter right in 90 feet of water, spread out in St. Thomas's Bay, which is probably where the ship came to run aground in Acts chapter 27. Luke explains what happened there. They cut anchors and ran aground in 90 feet of water. They found these first century anchors there. One of the anchors was made into dive weights, but the other 3 anchors you can still see if you go to the Maritime Museum in Valletta. And Bob thinks those are the anchors from Paul's shipwreck from Acts chapter 27. He's also been looking for the real Mount Sinai. I think he's right that the real Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. And if you ever want to see an incredible documentary on that, just look up the Mountain of Fire, which you can get off our website at crossexamined.org. Just click on store. It's just an amazing video. You might be able to find it online elsewhere too. Because where is Mount Sinai? According to Paul, it's in Arabia. It's not on the Sinai Peninsula. It's the Gulf of, look, here's the Sinai Peninsula, right? Here's from your perspective, Egypt's over here, right? Here's the Sinai Peninsula. Here's Saudi Arabia, right? The real Mount Sinai is over here in Saudi Arabia. Helena, the mother of Constantine, just picked this area to be where Mount Sinai is, but it doesn't fit any of the known biblical data. If you look over here, however, Jabal el-Lawz, or the Mount of Olives, also next to it's the Mountain of Moses, you will see that everything lines up. And Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams, who is the father of Michelle Williams, the actress, snuck into Saudi Arabia in 1989 and got some amazing footage, and there's been other people that have gone there. This is where the real Mount Sinai is. Also, he's been looking for the Ark of the Covenant. For those of you that don't read the Bible, that's Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay? And he thinks it's in a church in Axum, Ethiopia. Others have thought the same. I said, Bob, if you're ever given a chance to open it, make sure you don't, because we all know your face will melt. Okay? Don't open that. So, in any event, we did go on this Noah's Ark expedition into Iran. Why? The Bible says that the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. It didn't say Mount Ararat. In fact, Mount Ararat wasn't named until 1200 AD or so. It's a one volcanic cone. The mountains of Ararat could include the entire area of Ararat, which could have included the Elburz Mountains, which is in Iran, which is not far from the Caspian Sea. In fact, we went to the Caspian Sea. We flew to Tehran, and then we went 55 miles northwest into the Elburz Mountains. We went up to 13,000 feet, where we had some intel. There could have been the remains of what some people thought was Noah's Ark. We see this object sticking out of the side of a mountain. It's odd. We get up to it. It looked like there could have been planking from an old boat at one point. We reached out and touched it, and it was rock. But it looked like it was planking at one point. So we pulled samples off it. We brought them back to the United States, and 5 out of the 9 samples tested as petrified wood. But we can't prove it's Noah's Ark because it didn't say USS Noah on the side. I mean, how could you? Who knows what it was? But I believe it occurred at some point. Resurrections. How can you believe in a resurrection? Everyone I know who's dead is still dead. How can you believe in a resurrection? Seems crazy. And also, the biggest miracle is Jonah. Is that a tail of a whale or a whale of a tail? How can anybody believe in Jonah? That seems crazy, doesn't it? These are kind of outlandish, aren't they? Well, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? What do you think? Yeah, everyone says the resurrection. No, that's a big one, but it's easy compared to the greatest miracle. Red Sea's easy. Flood, easy. What? What? Yes, the greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. I mean, if it's true that there's a being that created space, matter, and time, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside of space, matter, and time? Of course. I mean, if he can create the whole show, can he resurrect Jesus from the dead? Can he do the Noah miracle? Can he keep Jonah alive in a fish or kill him and resurrect him 3 days later and spit him out on land? That's easy for God to create the universe out of nothing. Now, here's the interesting thing. We now have scientific evidence the first verse of the Bible is true. In fact, we've already been through it. Well, if the first verse is true, maybe the other verses are true as well. Obviously, if God can create the universe out of nothing, he can do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe. Now, what's all this logically impossible stuff you're thinking? You're probably thinking, I thought God can do anything. No, there's even some things God can't do. Like what? Yeah. He can't lie. He can't sin. He can't make a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create a married bachelor. Doesn't exist. I know some guys try, but he can't create a one-ended stick. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. I mean, there's some things that are just too hard for God. God, I mean, obviously, he can't sin, he can't lie, he can't go out of existence. We can do all those things. We can sin, we can lie. If he could sin, if he could lie, he wouldn't be God. He wouldn't be the standard of truth. In fact, that would make him weaker. It would degrade him. What's he going to change from? He's already a perfect being. Any change would necessitate a move from perfection to imperfection. He's what we call a completely actualized being. He's got no potential to him. He just is what he is. I am what I am. He is the standard by which everything else is measured. So this being can do anything he wants. It's not logically impossible. Now, can God create a rock so big he can't lift it? You probably heard this one, right? This is what is known. Well, let me show you how to refute that. It's really a bad question. Why? Because if somebody says, can God create a rock so big he can't lift it? You have to ask that person a question. What you have to ask them is this: how big is the rock? The person's going to say big. Well, how big is big? Really big. Well, how big is really big? Infinitely big. Now, this person has just traversed into what is known as a category mistake. What's a category mistake? A category mistake is confusing categories of thought or categories of reality. Because once he says he has an infinitely big, finite rock, he has a contradiction. Any rock is going to be finite, no matter how big it is. But you can't have an infinitely big, finite anything. You can't have an infinitely big, finite rock. Whatever rock God can make, he can move. But he can't make an infinite finite. That's a contradiction. That's like making a square circle. Right? This is a category mistake. What's another category mistake? I used one earlier. What's the chemical composition of justice? How much does justice weigh? Well, justice is not a physical thing, so you don't ask a physical question about a non-physical thing. Those are two different categories. You got a physical thing and a non-physical thing. So you don't ask a physical question about a non-physical thing. Same thing is true. Who made God? You're asking a question about a being who isn't made. You're asking who made the unmade? That's called a category mistake. Where was the man when he jumped off the bridge? It's a category mistake. Why? You say, well, he was on the bridge. No, that was before he jumped. Where was he when he jumped? Well, he was in the air. No, that's after he jumped. Where was he when he jumped? It's the category mistake. You can't ask a pinpoint question about a process. You know really where he was? He was beside himself. All right? So there's a lot of category mistakes out there. Don't let people confuse you with category mistakes. But if God created the universe, he can do any of these things, right? Notice also that if the New Testament documents are reliable, we haven't gotten there yet, but if they are, Jesus related two of the most controversial miracles to his own life: Jonah and Noah. Do you think Jesus thought Jonah and Noah were historical or hysterical? He thought they were historical. So I'm going to trust Jesus on those issues. You know, you ever watch, I'm sure you have, you watch the National Geo or History Channel or Discovery, or one of these so-called documentaries about the miracles of the Bible, and what are they all supposed to be? They're all supposed to be natural explanations for what are supposed to be supernatural events. You know, maybe the Nile turned red because of this red tide they get there every now and then, or the flood of the clay, or, you know, they come up with all sorts of crazy things. I saw one that said the parting of the Red Sea was caused by a Greek island exploding and it caused this strange weather pattern that caused the Red Sea to part. I mean, like, really? That takes more faith to believe in there's a God who just parted the Red Sea at the right time. The point here is, as C.S. Lewis put it, if we admit God, must we admit miracles? Indeed, you have no security against it. That is the bargain. Look, if God exists, miracles are possible. If the greatest miracle has already occurred, the creation of the universe out of nothing, then what we need to do is investigate each supposed occurrence of a miracle and see if the evidence lines up with believing it or not. Now you say, wait a minute, Frank, wasn't there a guy by the name of David Hume who said miracles you shouldn't believe in? How many have heard this name, David Hume? You heard the name? Okay, David Hume, very prominent philosopher in the 1700s. He was the only true atheist of the Enlightenment, the so-called Enlightenment. He died in 1776. Easy to remember when this guy lived. He actually came up with an argument that said you ought not believe in miracles, and that argument is still used to this day in universities to say don't believe in miracles. And here was his argument. Let's take a look at it. He said, natural law is by definition a description of a regular occurrence. Like if you start dropping things and you notice that every time you drop something, it gets pulled to the ground, regularly, you keep doing that, you realize there must be some sort of natural force known as gravity. It's a regular event. It happens over and over again. The second premise of his argument was this: a miracle is by definition a rare occurrence. Well, that's true. If miracles were occurring all the time, then they couldn't be considered miracles. They'd be natural events. Miracles, by definition, have to be rare if they're going to get our attention, right? His third premise was this: the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare. We see this when we watch a football game. We see a play from all different angles, several times, different speeds, where the ref sees it from one angle, one time, full speed, has to make the call. We see that our evidence for the regular, seeing it over and over again, is better than his evidence for the rare. Number 4, a wise man always bases his belief on the greater evidence. That seems axiomatic. You're not going to base your belief on the lesser evidence. So here's Hume's conclusion. Therefore, a wise man should never believe in miracles. Okay? Now, there has to be something wrong with one or more of those 4 premises if we're going to say that his conclusion doesn't follow. So if you want to believe in miracles, you have to find a fault in one of Hume's 4 premises here. Can anyone see if there's anything wrong with any of these premises? What's that? They're not in the same category. Nice try. Which one is wrong? Number 4, a wise man always bases his belief on the greater evidence? No, why would you base your belief on the lesser evidence? Number 1, no, natural law is by definition a scripture of regular occurrence. That's right. Number 5 is a conclusion. So, number 2, we got number 2 is good. 3, oh, it's got to be 3. What's wrong with number 3? Rare things do happen. And the evidence for the rare, or for the regular, is not always greater than that for the rare. Let me give you some examples of this. That is the problem premise. You guys finally got it at the end. As Winston Churchill said, Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing as long as they've tried everything else first. So you guys, you're right on. All right? All right, the evidence for regular is not always greater than that for the rare. Why? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take examples from Hume's own worldview. If Hume were here today, he would believe these things that I'm going to put up here on the screen because he's an atheist. But none of the things I put on the screen are regular events. They're all rare events. Yet he would believe them. For example, the Big Bang is not based on regular events, right? The Big Bang happened once. It's not the Big Bang, 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 bang theory, right? The creation of the universe happened once, yet we all believe it because there's evidence for it. It's a rare event, but there's evidence for it. Secondly, the origin of life on earth does not occur regularly. Whether that occurred by natural means or intelligent means is irrelevant at this point. The only question is, does it occur regularly? And the answer is no. It happened once, yet we all believe it. We're here, so it had to happen at least once, right? The question is, how did it occur? Well, that's another question, but we all believe the rare event that life came from non-life at some point in the distant past. I obviously think the evidence is way stronger. It was intelligence that did it, but that's not even the question here. We all believe it occurred. We're here, but it's rare. Also, macroevolution can't be repeated. If it happened at all, it happened only once. It's a singular history. Do you know that evolutionists cannot repeat macroevolution in the laboratory? In fact, Richard Linsky, I think he's at Michigan State, has been experimenting with E. coli bacteria for like 30 years now, which if you were to convert that to human lifespans, it'd be like 1 million years. And after 30 years of experimenting, trying to get E. coli bacteria to evolve, what does Richard Linsky have after 30 years? He has E. coli bacteria. He can get microevolutionary changes, adaptation. I think they can process cistrate now or something like that, but he can't get macroevolutionary changes, complete new body plans, complete new species. He can't get that using all the evidence in the world. In fact, do you know that biologists, developmental biologists, have been doing research into fruit fly embryos? They try and get the fruit fly embryo early on in the embryonic process to divert and become something else. And you know what the fruit fly embryo always does? It makes heroic efforts to get back on track to become a fruit fly. Now, again, is the fruit fly conscious? No. This fruit fly embryo doesn't know, then how does it always know to get back on track to become a fruit fly? Again, if it doesn't have its own mind, there's an external intellect directing it toward that end. And these experimenters get 3 possible results from these experiments. They get a dead fruit fly, they get a mutant fruit fly, or they get a normal fruit fly. They don't even get a horse fly, much less a horse. And yet here are the evolutionists trying to tell us that natural forces can break these genetic limits. Unintelligent forces. Yet here we are using all our intelligence and we can't break these genetic limits, and they're telling us that natural unintelligent processes can do so. How does that make any sense? If we can't do it with our minds, why do we expect an unintelligent process to do so? We shouldn't. It doesn't make any sense. But no extra charge for that. Whatever happened, if he were here, if he believed in macroevolution, it's a single process. You can't go in the history of the earth and repeat it. And then finally, the entire history of the earth cannot be repeated. Everything that occurs happens only once. I mean, the seminar we had before lunch happened only once. You can't go back and repeat it, but you have good reason to believe it occurred. Why? You were here. You're an eyewitness testimony. This goes back to one of Matthew's questions, right? When Matthew was talking about why should I believe certain thing? It's a good question. Why should I believe certain thing if it's statistically improbable? Because just because something's statistically improbable doesn't mean you ought not believe it. Everything is statistically improbable if you think about it. Every event is. It's statistically improbable that we are all sitting in the chairs we're in right now. But we all are. So we ought to believe it because we have evidence that we're sitting in these particular chairs. This is another problem that I think some people bring up with regard to miracles. They say, actually, let me say one other thing about number 4. You know, C.S. Lewis had a good point on this. He said, Hume shouldn't even believe in his own birth if you follow his logic through. Why? Because his birth happened only once. Why should he even believe that? You can't repeat your birth. The entire history is a singular history. It happened only once. So Hume's argument does not show that miracles don't occur. In fact, Hume's argument, if you notice, is really about the believability of miracles, not the actuality of miracles. He's not saying that he can prove miracles don't occur. He's saying no matter what evidence you have, you ought not believe in them. Well, there's a problem there. If a theory is telling you not to believe in something you have good evidence for, that's not a good theory. Now, some people will say, well, I can't believe in a miracle because I've never seen one. Now, that's pretty silly if you think about that. Why? There's a lot of things you believe in you've never seen. You believe in your mind. You've never seen that. You're using it right now, right? You believe in George Washington. You've never seen him. There's a lot of things. You believe in the laws of logic. You're using them right now. You've never seen them. You have access to them, but you've never seen them. And if miracles were occurring all the time, would they be miracles? No, we'd think there's some kind of natural event. In order for miracles to do their job, which is to get our attention and to say, this guy speaks for God, they have to be rare. If they were occurring all the time, they wouldn't get our attention. I mean, if people were resurrecting from the dead all the time, what would the resurrection of Christ mean? Yeah, you go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead for your sins. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No. Miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. So don't buy into this idea that since you haven't seen it, you ought not believe it. Of course, they're rare events. Actually, it turns out that there's a philosophical bias against miracles. This guy is Richard Lewontin. He's a Harvard geneticist, atheist, Darwinist. Got a lot of "ist" after his name. And then almost 20 years ago now, he had a very honest revelation that he wrote in the New York Review of Books about why scientists don't believe in miracles. Here's what he wrote. This is an abbreviation of a longer quote. He said, it's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori, meaning our prior adherence to material causes, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Why can't you allow a divine foot in the door? Number of reasons. One reason is if God gets his foot in the door, then we as scientists are not going to be seen as the new priests who dispense truth to the general public. Secondly, if God gets his foot in the door, we have lost control. We think we can explain everything by natural forces. We don't want God involved. Thirdly, if God's involved, then we might not get our grant money that we're supposed to get. In fact, Kevin was bringing this up earlier when he was talking about, well, this organization gave us the grant to go do the dig there. If we come back with evidence that counters what they wanted us to find, they're going to be upset, and we're not going to be able to stay out here on the archaeology field, right? That happens. It certainly happens in the world of evolution. If you don't get results that advance what the grant money people want, guess what? You're not going to get any more money. You thought science was objective, didn't you? No, because people aren't always objective. In fact, a survey done a few years back in Michigan, I think it was University of Michigan put it out, found out that 33% of scientists admitting to fudging the data to get the results they wanted. Those are just the third that admitted it. Think about that. There's political reasons to come up with evidence that you want. There's emotional reasons. There's financial reasons. We don't want God involved. And one of the biggest reasons people don't want God involved are moral reasons. If God's involved, I can't do what I want to do. In fact, Ron Carlson was a Christian apologist. He's since passed on. But he used to go to a lot of different colleges and high schools and point out the problems with Darwinian theory. And he was invited to one classroom, one professor invited him in. He gave his lecture on the problems with Darwinism, and after the lecture, they went out to lunch. He went out to lunch with the professor, and the professor, they were talking, and Ron said, "What'd you think of my lecture?" And the professor said, "I think what you said was very true, Ron. I really think there are a lot of problems with Darwinism, but I'm going to keep teaching Darwinism anyway." And Ron said, "Well, why would you do that?" And he said, "Well, I'll tell you the truth, Ron, because if it's true we came from slimy green algae, then I can sleep with whoever I want to sleep with. Darwinism is morally comfortable." Again, he didn't want there to be a God. He's not open to the evidence. He's not on a truth quest. He's on a happiness quest. Again, as Pascal said, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. Here's the problem. This sword cuts both ways, Christians. Are you just believing in Christianity because you find it attractive? Oh, I got somebody up there looking out for me. I love the people here at church. When I die, I'm going to be with Jesus. I just like that. Well, here's the saving grace to this whole thing, no pun intended, is that you can be right about something and not know why you're right, thankfully. You can have the right beliefs and not have any evidence as to why they're the right beliefs. but they could still be the right beliefs. I think that's the case with Christianity. Nobody has all the answers. We're all ignorant in certain areas. In fact, somebody said it that way. Everyone's ignorant just in different areas. But we make basic life decisions on far less evidence than the evidence we have for Christianity. You notice that? When you get out from this seminar today and start driving home, you just have faith you're going to get home safely. When you coming up over a hill and you can't see somebody coming the other way, you just have faith they're not going to be in your lane. Do you know they're not going to be in your lane? No. But you have good reason to believe they're not going to be in your lane, because most people obey the traffic laws. They're not going to be driving on the wrong side of the street. But are you absolutely sure? No, you're not. Every time you get on an airplane, I don't even know who's flying the plane, and I get on. Don't know anything about the crew, anything about the maintenance. I don't know anything about any of them, but I get on all the time. I don't even know if the guy knows how to fly. I don't know if the maintenance is to be done right. But I get on. You get on, don't you? We live and make life and death decisions on far less evidence than what we have for Christianity.